Hey everyone, Reed here with Big Strong Book, author of Chorus of 1,000, now available on Amazon. And today we are talking about, at long last, the finale to The Last King of Osten, The Navigator's Children by Tad Williams. So, after all, this channel pretty much got started on discussing the works, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn in particular. Obviously got a little off track with that chapter by chapter reread. Hopefully someday in the near future I'll revisit those early books again, give them more proper discussions and reviews on the channel. TBD on that, don't know when. But this book, which is the, one could say maybe, I guess, the finale to the saga, at least for now, and the culmination of nine books. You have the three in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. You have the Dragonbone Chair, Stone of Farewell to Green Angel Tower. And then you have The Heart of What Was Lost, which was a very short, interlude novel. And then you have the four now in Last King of Osten, or the three before for the culmination. You had The Witchwood Crown, so that's four, and then the Witchwood Crown, Empire of Grass, Into the Narrow Dark, that's seven. And then you have Brothers of the Wind, which was a distant prequel novel focusing on Inuleki and Hakatri. And so that's 8 books. So this is the 9th in the overall saga, including all side stuff, interlude, bridge books, including everything. This is the 9th in the saga. The Osten saga, again, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. I've already said a lot about it on this channel. One of my favorite series, certainly specifically fantasy series of all time. It's so perfect. It's the right mixture of kind of an old school fantasy, and it came out at a crucial time where things were starting to shift a little. You were getting more complex narratives. The world building was getting fleshed out in a way that added complexity to the plot and characters, where you have a crap ton of viewpoint characters, webs of deceit. You have the politics side of it, in addition to a hero's journey, in addition to kind of this strange supernatural evil force. And then I think the plus side with The Last King of Osten, which of course is the sequel series to Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, taking place about 35, because characters who are teenagers in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn who are in this are mentioned to be in their early 50s, so about 35 years. And yeah, you get this, which fixed now that The Last King of Osten is over, it fixed, I think, a lot of some of the hang-ups that I had with Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, while at the same time creating a few more. Now I'll get into that here in a little bit. But I have to say, I really enjoyed this novel, as well as The Last King of Osten in general. It was such a well-written follow-up to an already great series. And specifically within this, I think the character work of Tad Williams, he's at his fullest powers, although there are still, again, now looking back on it, now that I've finished this, still some hangups. But in terms of the nuance that perhaps was lacking, or that he just wasn't interested in telling in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, specifically with Scythy characters, the Norns, so the Zendaya and the Hikadaya, these two opposing factions of a common race, you get that nuance with The Last King of Osten. So if you read Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, and you were like, yeah, that was great, but the Norns, the Hikadaya, they just seemed, this kind of faceless, bland evil, and there's not a lot of, we don't know these, because they're sentient beings. We don't know about them. We don't know where they're coming from. We don't know the struggles they have. Well, you'll get your answers and then some with Hikadaya characters, many of them within this series, and many more Zendaya characters as well, including, I mean, new Zendaya and new Scythe and returning faces from Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Now, Tad Williams has, I think, a little bit of a propensity to go long in his stories. To Green Angel, I should have brought it with me, but To Green Angel Tower is so long. It's like 1,100 pages, the original hardcover, and the mass market paperback that I have, so big that it had to be split into 2 volumes, 2 800-page books. So, and then he tried it, I think, with his Shadow March series, which I haven't read it yet, where he intended it to be a trilogy, and it ended up being 4 books because his last story ended up being so long. The exact same thing happened with this series. The Last King of Osten, it was going to be a trilogy until the last book ended up too long, and he split it into 3 and 4. So, Into the Narrow Dark, which is technically, I think, you could consider that, excuse me, you can consider that part 1 of the finale, The Navigator's Children being part 2. Into the Narrow Dark was about 500 pages, but still, I mean, that's a decent amount, especially with the font size in these books and everything. It's a hefty amount, and this is exactly, not including the appendix, this is about 700 on the number. And so again, right off the bat, again, a lot of positive stuff. The most positive thing I can say, so we'll start with the greatest of positives, is the climax. How everything in the, I would say, plot, the A plot, the primary plot, how everything comes together in that. The climax of this story is phenomenal. It's so good. It gets to the point where it becomes so relentless, and you think you're gonna just kind of get bowled over, and you're gonna be like, okay, let's just get to it. The action is so intense, and then it gets to a point, again, I'm trying to dance around plot and specifics to avoid spoilers, but it gets to the point where the action is so relentless, and then it stops. It stops. And it remains that way. You are on the edge of your seat in slow motion with these characters for like 50 or 60 pages, almost 10% of this book, or at least that's what it felt like. You are on the edge of your seat because you're like, oh my God, like, I have no idea what's going to happen next. And when the climax hits, it wasn't the way I thought it was. Things about the climax didn't go down the way I thought that they were going to go down, but then looking back on it, to me at least, it made perfect sense. A lot of things are revealed, of course, too. Tanakiru, the Narrow Dark, the Valley of Mists, or the Veil of Mists. That was a big question mark coming into this still for these characters. What is in this valley? What is in this thing? That Utuku and the Hikadaya, what are they looking for here? What is she looking for here? What does she want to find? What's the big mystery? Because after all, so I'll spoil a little bit of the 3rd book, Into the Narrow Dark. So if you haven't read any of this series, or if you don't care, whatever, but some spoilers for how the 3rd book ended. So ending with the 3rd book, we had the Hayholt burned to the ground. A foe Norn force attacked, destroyed the Hayholt, but Utuku did not direct her main force there. That was to draw attention away from Tanakiru, which is where she was actually going, where we already had the characters Morgan and Nazaru. We had them at Tanakiru. We had Simon, and Miriamel was on her way to the Hayholt, and that's kind of how everything ended. A huge climactic cliffhanger ending Into the Narrow Dark, which was, oh crap, Utuku's not here. Where is she going? Why is she going? We got to get to the valley. We got to get to the Narrow Dark as soon as possible. So that's kind of how this book begins. It's in a flurry as characters are trying to be like, oh crap, what do we do? Where do we go? What do we do? And then it settles into itself, into its pace, and this the part one of this book in particular kind of falls into the trap. It's kind of a trap, but it's unfortunately it has come to be expected with epic fantasy novels. Especially the first few parts of it are slow. You're kind of setting the tone, you're setting the pace, you're setting the scene, but I call it like it's like the trek factor in epic fantasy novels, where you have characters that want to get from point A to point B, and it takes a while to travel there. And so you just, a lot of the book is characters in motion, characters going from point A to point B, or then sometimes to point C, whatever. And that can grate on you a little bit. But still, mysteries were revealed. There was a huge twist short way into this book that I was like, oh man, did not see that coming. And now I'm interested to go back to the previous books and see, okay, where were the hints of this twist that happened? It's very obvious, the twist, when you get to it in this book. And again, everything around the primary plot, which is everything within the Narrow Dark, Tanakiru, characters that are all of a sudden being like, we got to go there. All of that is great. There are two other bigger subplots that just did not land for me at all with this book, unfortunately. And there are some great characters, some really great characters that are trapped within these subplots and never get out of them. Or, so I will say, like, I was disappointed I'll just say the characters, disappointed in kind of the plots that they were involved in without getting into too many specifics. So there's a subplot in Hernesteer, Aelair, Aelin, those characters. Aelair's a great character, and he's not utilized much in this book, same with Aelin. And then Miriamel, Tiamat even a little bit too. They're fantastic characters. They're barely utilized in this, because a lot of, and it's in the inside cover, kind of the teasing synopsis of this book is that Miriamel is going to go after Passaveles. She's going to go after him. And that's what she's preoccupied with. And the Passaveles, after he had his super villain reveal, we knew that we as the reader knew that he was the bad guy, but it wasn't apparent to the characters in the story that he was until the third book. It was so hammy and over the top that it was fine, but it didn't make Passaveles an interesting character anymore, unfortunately, because the cat was out of the bag and there was nothing left in the bag. And he also, in Passaveles' orbit, of course, is pulled in characters like Unver, the Thrithings characters. They were very fascinating in the other books, and even it felt like it was building up to something with the Navigator's children, and no, not really. So part of that, I wonder, is the fact that that this book, both to its credit and to its ultimate fault, I think, again, I really liked this book. It's just, you start, now that the story's over, you can start to see, okay, what I wanted to see more of, what I wanted to see less of, to make it as impactful as it could have been, because this isn't, I think, Tad Williams at his most potent as a storyteller. It might be his best exercise in a canvas of characters and the themes that he works with, and I'll get into particulars, and I'll have to get into spoilers for some thematic stuff. But I think with such a broad canvas of characters, you're gonna to not overcrowd like the A plot, you're gonna have to have these subplots. But when the subplots are not as fundamentally interesting as the main plot, and they're not even peripherally interesting, that really drags the book down. Like when I would be on a Simon chapter, for example, or a Morgan, a Nazeru, a Viyeki, where like the characters that are involved or trying to get to this big like rendezvous point. When it would go to Hernisteer, I'd kind of roll my eyes and I'd be like, okay, like we gotta just kind of get through this subplot before we get back to the main story. And that's a shame, because I feel like, especially in an epic fantasy novel where you're gonna have a ton of subplots, I mean it's part of the duty of the writer to make sure that the subplots are at the very least engaging. Sure, they might not capture your attention as much as the main plot, but they need to do that a little bit, and this failed to. But I mean, the characters are still, lively, they're still great. And I think at the end of the day, at the end of this story, characters get the arcs they deserve, and they get arcs that are fitting for all of them. I think I can't think of a character that where they ended up wasn't fitting or didn't make sense. That's the good thing, at least. There weren't any all of a sudden twists and a character's acting a way that they never have before, and it just completely ruins the story. There's none of that. Everything makes sense. It's just where Tad Williams chooses to focus his time in the book, and that a lot of these subplots are given a lot of screen time, so to speak, when they're just not interesting. And I'm like, I get it. You kind of have to wrap up all of these things. This is the last book. You kind of got to put a neat bow on it. But what he should have done was cut his losses, those losses being those subplots, and either really cut them down or find some spark in them that can all tie everything together, and there's not really that. So that's one of my biggest negatives, one that I'll get into here in a little bit. It's both a positive and a negative, but it's hard to talk about without spoiling it. So from this point on, I'll get into some spoilers, but I'll kind of go shallow into the deep water with these spoilers. I'll try to keep things at first as vague as possible. But I might not. I don't know. I'll try to. So if spoilers aren't your thing, obviously, and if you haven't read this and you're planning to, please don't. I don't want to ruin some crucial moments in this book, some great moments that just floored me, because I was experiencing them with a fresh mind and fresh eyes. So click away. So the climax of this book, again, marvelous how everything comes together. So I'll get into a little. This will be specific, not whatever. Spoilers for everything. You've been warned. I'll get into specifics, because I can't dance around the vague parts of it. So the first twist, I loved that Jaloi, not Umu the Whisperer, has kind of been a key figure this whole time. The return of Jaloi was great, as well as the reveal of what the secret, or that there's this ship that's in the Narrow Dark, this 9th ship that the Tanukadaya kind of came over from the garden, but that was kind of hidden in secret, but a lot of people still knew about it. And then what Utuku was after, the little like crystal of unbeing, that she was like, I'm going to throw this and it's all done. Because what does Utuku want? Grants her biggest desires, which is to die. She wants to die, which then ties in. And again, the prophecy that is brought up, I don't remember, because it's been a couple years since I've read the early books in The Last King of Osten Ard, but the prophecy about Nizeru, essentially that she, from the Frog clan or whatever, would grant that desire which the queen wishes most, which is death. She wants to die, but it's not going to be in the way that Utuku thinks. I like everything with when Utuku then kind of enters that she's on that plateau with all of the other characters. Simon, who wants to get to his granddaughter, and he can't. He's literally frozen. He wants to. And you get the ogre, which is this like witchwood kind of mechanical, almost, I imagine it kind of like a steampunk type beast, is about to kill his granddaughter. Oh, and then Hakatree. My God, that stuff was just brilliant. I loved all the Hakatree stuff. The internal conflict, the pulling between the voices of the three, and then between the spirits in the ship. And he wants to end his own suffering. He wants to make amends with the daughter that he can't. But what can he do to make those amends? He has to give in, but he can't. It's what can heal his pain, and Jaloi can. Then Jaloi literally steps into the armor of the Navigator. That whole Hakatree thing is just marvelous. I loved that to pieces. Hakatree in general, the way that he is brought back and resurrected was in such a creepy and great and at least realistic into this universe, a realistic kind of way that I loved. Couldn't get enough of it. And then the way that Utuku meets her demise is just Yarnulf. If at first you don't succeed, try again. He tries to kill her, he tries to kill her, and only when Nizeru does it. And what's interesting is that Vyeki does it when he collapses the tunnel and tries to kill Utuku, but he doesn't know why he's doing it. It's almost like his true inner desires are starting to come about. They're starting to be realized, but he doesn't know why, or at least he doesn't understand it until the deed is done, until the queen she's taken away from the people and they can rule. And then you have, and Nizeru, it's the same thing. It's just this pain, this despair, and she's drawn towards the queen. And when she literally stabs her, then Yarnulf is able to kind of get his arrow in to kill her. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, but then the crystal's going to drop and then it's going to all be over, right? And then the giant is there, just reaches out his hand and like an unconscious thing and catches the crystal, saving them all. And I was just like, oh, that's just it. The way I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time. It was brilliant, but I was confused. The reason why I was confused was because the climax of this book, the climax of this series, the climax of the entire 9-book saga happens, and we still have 250 pages left. I was so confused because I'm like, usually when that happens, in a movie, for example, the main villain dies or is whatever happens 2/3 of the way through. And you're like, okay, but there's something like, we still have and that was with this book. It was more than 1/3 of this book still to go. And I was like, okay, is it over? Or is there going to be a new twist and, oh, Utuku's back? And I was so confused. And I was trying to figure it out because I was like, okay, I think, are we done? I'm like, this is interesting because I did not expect the primary plot of this book to wrap up with 1/3 of the book still to go. I was shocked. I was like, oh man. On one side, I was like, wow, this is great that, that we have time to wrap everything up. But at the same time, I'm like, good grief, it's 250 pages of an ending. I admire Tad Williams for doing that, for not dragging the primary plot. It ended where it felt right to end it. It would have felt worse had it dragged on for another 100 pages or so. It was coming to an end, and he ended it in the perfect way. But you still have 250 pages of book left. You still have over 1/3 of the books left. And so I was like, okay, what's going to be the next? Is there going to be something that comes up? And no. Aside from the subplots, granted, the positive of that is you get time to really dive into what the themes of the story are about. Characters that did not expect to live to the end of this conflict. And now they're here. The Hikadaya, who lived their whole life under the yoke of the Mad Queen, are now free. They're free to rule themselves. Well, what do? How do you do that when somebody who is so powerful and so evil, gone? And yet you still have all these people to take care of so it's an interesting examination in the ending of this book of kind of the nature of power, the nature of evil within power and absolute power and supernatural power at that, and what happens when you take that figure away. Viyeki's not evil, Pratiki's not, these characters aren't evil. They're going to rule the best that they can. And it's how these warring people make up, how they learn to live together as a people, as a cohesive, cohabitating people in the land of Osten. How do they do that? That was really fascinating, and something that I can't remember the last time I read something like this in fantasy. It's probably out there somewhere in a series where you get the end of the conflict, but then they have these council sessions. How do we deal with this? We didn't get that in Lord of the Rings, for example. After Sauron is defeated, we don't exactly have these council sessions of like, okay, what do we do with all these orcs? Is there an orc representative for the, what do we, yeah. But I like that because it felt natural. It felt real. What do you do? Well, you have to mend the bridges. You have to create the ties again, because these people, the Zendaya, the Hikadaya, they used to be one. Even the Tanukadaya were kind of part of that. So how do you set aside these differences and come together? It's crucial for any land, and we deal with that all the time in our own world. How can we learn to end these conflicts and then come together better so these types of conflicts don't happen in the future? Which again then ties back into the last king of Ostenard. Simon and Miriamel kind of want to do away with having one king over all of these distinct provinces that they ultimately do not understand, which was made so crucial, especially within Miriamel in Nabon in the series, where she was told, you do not understand the way we do things here. How can you understand the way our people handle our conflicts? We don't take kindly to somebody who has no fundamental understanding about who we are as a people telling us what to do. And they take that to heart, and that they're able to kind of move past that. So that part of the resolution is great. What drags the ending down a little bit for me is the fact that there is so much of it, which is, again, both a positive. I like especially in epic fantasy series, where we get a long road home, so to speak, a long ending, where so many times I think of the Wheel of Time is a little bit like this, and other series too. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn was a little bit like this, where we get the climax, the main conflict ends, and we get a little epilogue, just a little bit. We don't get an extended ending that will give the fullest justice to the world, to the characters. Where it does not do justice is in the subplots. By then giving those even more weight and more screen time, especially the Passavelli stuff, which was not interesting at all. I was like, okay, come on, let's get to the interesting parts of the ending. Like, it's over. So in one respect, I'm interested because I was shocked by how soon he decided to end the primary conflict, but I was intrigued to see if there was anything else and where he would take these themes, and I liked the direction that he took the themes and the characters within that. But it was the subplots, because what do you have? You have to wrap up these subplots that unfortunately weren't that interesting to begin with. The Passavelli stuff, the Hernisteer stuff. It's like you just want to kind of get through that. There might be other people who disagree and who think differently, and that's great. But I just don't think that way. It's just, to me, that is not fundamentally interesting. So that's where it's like, again, it's bold. It's really bold to have your ending be 250 pages before the ending of the actual book. But what that means is you really have to justify that ending. There are endings. So, for example, you get into like this fallacy and this unfortunate habit of you're going to end up comparing something to The Lord of the Rings. Now, The Lord of the Rings is known, both books and movies, for having a very long ending. Granted, I think it is 100% necessary, the books, the movies, to have that long of an ending. You need all that wrap up for as epic as a story as that. It would feel like a disservice if you just ended it after the conflict was over. You need a time for the themes of loss, of change, of who you are as a person, and coming back home again, and the fact that you can't really come back home again, and some things are irreparably broken within you. The themes of Lord of the Rings. You need time for those to be fully realized, to breathe, to come to fruition, so you can have. There's a great video on YouTube, I forget who did it, but of comparison between the climax of the plot and the climax of the story, or the plot and the characters. And they come at two different points. You need the climax of the plot. That happens when Sauron is defeated, but then the climax of the characters, specifically Frodo, happens at the way end, and you need that longer ending sequence. The movies do away with this, whether or not side of the coin you fall on with whether the books were good as adaptation or whether the movies were good as adaptations. There's one thing within the Lord of the Rings as a book, collective book, that I still do not love. And it's something that is, I think, a little bit of a point of contention. You can probably guess where I'm going with that. Scouring of the Shire. The second to last chapter of the entire thing, where they come back to the Shire and, oh my gosh, it's in chaos, and we have to destroy Sharky or Starkey or whoever Saruman is, whatever Saruman is going by. But it's not interesting, because you're like, it's over. Go, like the Ferris Bueller, it's over. What are you still doing here? Like, the conflict is over. We want to get to the ending, but it just feels weird to introduce a whole nother conflict with like 40 pages left. We're like, okay, let's just get to like we're on the home stretch. So at least Williams with this, at least he doesn't introduce all of these new conflicts, but it's just because he then goes back to the subplots that weren't interesting to begin with, it drags it down a little bit. So overall, it's a very good ending. It's perhaps not the best it could have been, just with the focus on those subplots and then trimming the fat off the edges, which this book definitely needed with the ending. I don't mind the fact that he decided to end it as early as he did, but I don't think that huge ending of nearly a third of this book was entirely justified. So that's where it knocks it down. This is more of a 4 out of 5 rather than a 5 out of 5 for me. So, The Navigator's Children, The Last King of Osten, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn, any of those books. If you've read it, let me know what you think of it. And as always, I will see you guys next time.